I pulled it. I did it just now, like this morning. Yeah. All right, everyone, we're gonna get started here in like 30 seconds. Okay, so as you all might have noticed, the last session, Wednesday and Thursday, was actually a Saturday class because Labor Day kind of threw everything off. So today's technically a Monday-Tuesday session, so that doesn't mean we're going to get out of class sooner, but it does mean that we get a little bit more time on some of the more difficult exercises. So that's good. But pretty much today is just a bunch of activities. We're going to be learning about local storage and session storage and cookies. This is persistence week, or the first intro into persistence. So after today, we're going to be playing with Firebase, which is a it's a database you can use from your front-end clients. So it has its own API. You can just call into it and save all your data, right? So you can build a full application once you know how to use Firebase, because you can save stuff, come back to it later, and pull that same stuff in. Like, you could even build a login form and all kinds of stuff with Firebase. So there's a lot you can do. So it's pretty cool. To start today, work with some people around you. We're going to do partners, so 2 or 3 people around you. We're going to be doing a basic to-do app. So it's going to look like this. You'll have all this HTML. You're just going to have to do the JavaScript portion of it. To do something, and when you click add item or you hit enter, it'll create a new to-do. And you can see I can create as many as I want. Then the other thing it does is when you click this check mark, it deletes the to-do. So we're going to do this activity first today to get an understanding of what the JavaScript's going to look like. And then at the end of class, the second half of class, we're going to build this with local storage so you can refresh the page and get all your to-dos. So that'll be pretty cool. Anyway, work with a few people around you. Spend about 15 minutes doing this, and we'll go from there. It's activity number 1 of week 7, so if one of the TAs could select it out. It should be in the GitLab repo as well if you've pulled down the recent changes. I would do this on one person's machine. Also, the other people in your group can kind of just help talk you through the solution, because it's a complicated one. So there's also something new we see in this one, dynamic click handlers. So there's some code in there to create a click handler when a new element is created with a certain class. So that's cool too. You get to see how that works in jQuery. Alex, who are you working with? Okay. Hey, Rolando, you want to work with Jose? Jose, I'll have you two work together, so at least you have a partner to work with on this one. However you can get it done. Just try to follow the instructions and to put the to-dos in an array. You don't necessarily need to because we have HTML elements, right? So you can just add and remove them through pure jQuery. What's up, Mr. Carson? How you doing, Nick? Good. All right, let's go ahead and go over this one. This was your warm-up exercise, and I know it wasn't all that easy. Pull the code over. Boom. All right, we've got our code. So they gave us all the HTML, which is pretty poorly formatted, by the way. It's kind of hard to read because it's all in one line, so don't do that. But anyway, they gave us most of it, and it opens up that text box with a button that says add to do or whatever, right, or add item. And then when you click it, you're supposed to generate a new to do. Okay, so we just go through the instructions. We're going to go ahead and create an initial to do count variable. To do count. And we're going to set it to 0 because there's no to dos. Okay? So in here, in the to-do click, this is where the bulk of the functionality is going to reside, right? Because this is where we're going to have to create a new to-do, and then we're going to have to add it to the list, and create the little button, and all that fun stuff, right? So get the value from the to-do value from the text box and store it in a variable. So the text box has an ID of to-do, you can see right here. Var, we'll just call it var to-do. We use our jQuery, right? .val. And boom, we've got our text out of our text box. Okay, so now we need to create a new variable that will hold the p tag. Now remember with jQuery, when you're creating an element, the difference is you have to have the angle brackets inside of the quotes, right? When you put the angle brackets in there, jQuery knows, okay, it's a new element. If I didn't have the angle brackets, it would select all the p tags, right? And then p would be probably nothing in this case. So now we need to give it an ID in the following form. Item 4, item 3, item 99, wherever the number is equal to the to-do count. Okay? And then set the to-do value as a text on the p element. So let's first add an ID. We use the attr. And then we need to make it item dash and plus to-do count. Right? So it starts at 0. You could start it at 1. It doesn't really matter. It's just kind of your starting point. Then set the to-do value as the text in the p element. So p.text to do. Okay? So we are going to now have to create a button with a unique identifiers based on what number it is in the list. Alright. So we can go ahead and make a new button. And we're going to have to set the button's ID because we need to give it a unique identifier based on what number it is in the list, right? So this can be whatever you want. Let's call it ID, and then we'll call it to do button dash and then plus to do count. Lastly, add the letter X inside. Button dot text X. Append the button to the to-do item. Oh, I forgot to add the checkbox class. You're right, and the data to do. So if we do button dot add class checkbox, right? And button dot attr data to do count. And in this regard, we actually don't even need to give it a unique ID, right? Because we just need to know what button it is, because we can pull the to-do count on it. We actually don't need to do any of that. We don't even need to set the ID because we have the class and the data to do inside of it, right? The ID doesn't really help us much. So because I didn't read this line, I skipped it on accident, I added unnecessary work. It's the value of reading the instructions, I guess. Append the button to the to-do item. So this is going to be our p tag, and we can just append our button. All right. Add the button and the to-do item to the to-dos div. So we can go through here, and it's to-dos, append, p. Clear the text box when done. So the text box was, if we go back up, to do, right? So we have to select it again. And if we pass it an empty string to val, it'll set it to nothing. And then add to the to-do count. To-do count plus plus, right? Because that increments it. Make sense so far? Oh, yep, good catch. So it's a spelling error right there, and it wouldn't have worked, and then I would have had to track that down, so good eye, Adam. Okay, so the next part, the interesting part right here, is we have this document body.onClick, comma, .checkbox, comma, function. Basically what this is we're registering this global click handler that every time an element with a checkbox class is created, we add this click function to it. So that makes it pretty convenient, right? So since our button we created with the little X in it has the data, the checkbox class, it will be affected by this. So we can get the to-do count out of it by using our jQuery this. I've got the equal sign. And it's data to do, right? Select and empty the specific P element that previously held the to-do number. So we can go ahead and select it. And this was item and then plus to-do count, right? And it says select and empty, but we can just do remove and get rid of it. So if I take this, open it in Chrome, oh, I put the button at the end. We can fix that. I should be able to click this. Oh man, it didn't work. Let's see why. Nothing in the console. Oh, I probably did my selection wrong. In jQuery? Yep. I forgot my pound sign. So because I forgot my pound sign, it's not actually selecting that p tag to remove it. So right here we had the button that was going to the end of the p tag when it actually should be going to the beginning, so we can use prepend. Now if I open up my HTML, now it looks how it should, and when I click, it's removed. Any questions on this code right here that we just walked through together? So the TAs will Slack out the solution so you can take a look at it. You can inspect it yourself. What I want you to do is spend a few moments with your group. If your solution didn't work or was incomplete, why? Figure out why. Did you just not finish the functionality? Was there something you were stuck on? What were you stuck on and why? Spend 5 minutes doing that. Yeah. Sure. Answer your own question?
Well, I was just going to say, wouldn't it be more practical to not reuse the top variable and the global variable so it doesn't cost those units? Because I thought initially we had used that to-do number as to do count. Which would, I mean, it would work, it works, but it would be confusing to read the code for some people, knowing that you're reusing, basically they're reusing that. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, you have a point. The naming here can be confusing. I mean, naming's hard. Really what it comes down to. Okay, so maybe you guys gleaned something from that, maybe you didn't. Maybe you said, oh, well, I don't honestly know why that was in the activity lesson plan, but it's there. They wanted you to talk about it, so maybe you could say, oh, hey, I don't quite understand this part of jQuery yet. They kind of give you an idea of what you could potentially spend time studying, like for homeworks and stuff. Because, you know, this stuff's tough. We've covered a lot. It's hard to remember all of it. That's just a fact. So one of the things that we noticed about this app is it's all fine and dandy, but if I refresh the page, all my to-dos are gone. All of that hard work of all the typing I just did has been destroyed. And, you know, I only typed test a few times, but if I had actually typed out legitimate to-dos, my to-do list for the day, it might be a little bit longer. Mine today, no, it wouldn't be. It'd probably be nothing. But, you know, in a real-world scenario, it might be, right? And you don't want it to go away. You want it to be there forever. You want to make a real app that can store this data and bring it back. And there's several ways you can do that. And we've already worked with some of them. Using our AJAX calls, we talked with a lot of APIs. And APIs had the magic ability to return the same data to us when we made the same call, right? Because they're saving data somewhere. In a database, you know, in a file, it doesn't really matter. But they're persisting that data. And there's a term, data persistence, which at this point you could probably assume what it means if you didn't already. where we can take our data, we can store it, save it somewhere for future use, right? To build a full working application, most of the time your users expect some form of data persistence, unless it's literally just like, you know, maybe it's a drawing app and you're not storing anything, right? You're just like, oh, well, you can just scribble on the web page. But, you know, there's a few examples where you wouldn't need it, but most of the time you need something. Either you need to remember login credentials, or you need to remember someone's email address, or you need to remember what kind of to-dos they made, right? There's a ton of things you can do with solid data persistence. So there's a couple of different types of data persistence. There's client-side data persistence and server-side data persistence, or client-side storage, server-side storage, right? So those APIs we were using with jQuery and Ajax, that's server-side storage. We go out, we hit some API somewhere, it's on a server somewhere, it's not in our browser, server-side storage. Client-side storage, which we'll be looking at today, is the idea that your browser actually has APIs built in it to save information for some limited amount of time. So there's a few different ways we can do that. But first, I'd like you to spend about a minute or two discussing with your group the difference between client-side storage and server-side storage, the pros and cons of each, and why you would want one over the other. So again, client-side storage, it's on your browser. It's specific to your machine and even your specific browser. Server-side storage is on an API somewhere, right? So just spend like a minute or two discussing that. See if you can come up with a good list of why we want one over the other. All right. Does anyone have any ideas of why we'd want to use client-side storage? No one has. You don't have any ideas? Yeah, you do. To save money, so you don't have to host stuff on a server. Yeah. Okay, that's one reason. Yeah. Temporary storage for a user in case they leave a web page or something. Yeah, that's a great reason to use client-side storage, Jesse.
We've used privacy concerns.
Privacy concerns in what way?
In that passwords, stuff like that, could be stored in a local database or file that so that only or in the browser, so that it's only on the client side. So if the customer doesn't want to send his specific data back, all his specific data back to the company, you can store it locally.
Sure. Yeah. So privacy concerns. If there's stuff you don't want to send over the wire, you can go ahead and keep it on the client side, right? Okay. Server side. Good reason to use server-side storage. That one might be a little bit more obvious. Yep. Yeah, there's a potential for accessing it anywhere, right? Through an API or something. Yeah, that's a great reason to use it. Anyone else?
Minimal downtime.
What was that?
Minimal downtime.
Minimal downtime? Yeah, minimal downtime's good if you can manage it.
If you've got a lot of information, you don't want to fill up the client's computer.
Absolutely. If you've got a lot of information, you could, you know, fill up a client's computer and kind of ruin that. It's possible some of these APIs, like the OMDB API that we've used, have hundreds of gigabytes of data that, you know, if you put it on your machine, your whole disk is eaten up, right? And if everyone's going to use it and they all had the 100 gigabytes of data, you can imagine the download times, you can imagine how much space is wasted, right? So those are all great, yeah. Excellent reasons to use both. So what we're going to talk about mainly today is client-side storage and the client-side approach to storing things and why it's important. Firebase, we're going to start talking about next session, and then the last session of this week is more server-side. So we'll get to play with both of them in this week, which is great. But today is just client-side storage. And so there are three different ways that we're going to talk about. Two for sure, one if we've got time. Local storage is the first one. Local storage is an easy API that every browser has these days that allows you to just store arbitrary data as a string. So you can go ahead and you create a name for that data, give it like a key basically, so you could call it username, and then you can store the username in your browser. Local storage is specific to a website and specific to a browser. So in Google Chrome, if I have something stored in local storage, I can't get to it from a different website in Chrome than the one that stored it, and I can't get to it from a different browser. So it's pretty safe, right? That website created it. That website knows that its storage is safe. And you can imagine it's really easy to use it. There's an easy JavaScript API for it. It's fast, right? You don't got to go over the wire to do anything. It's pretty compatible with older browsers, but local storage is fairly new, so you can't go too far back, right? But then we're going to talk about cookies. Cookies are super compatible with lots of different browsers because they're old, basically, the way to put it. But cookies are stored client-side as well, so your server can generate a cookie, but your cookie is stored in your browser related to a specific website, again. And basically, they're just arbitrary strings of data that let you store stuff. You might have heard of cookies or seen cookies when you go to a website and they say, we have a cookie policy, you need to click OK or something to continue. That's because there's some information about your experience and that your session on that website that they're keeping track of, either your login information or something along those lines. Now, when I say login information, I'm not saying they keep your password because that's bad, but they keep other stuff to basically verify that you are logged in. And we'll get into that a little bit later in the class. And then we'll potentially talk about session storage, which is just like local storage, except for it does not last longer than your session, which means if you close the browser or close the tab you're on, it's gone. So it's still helpful because you can go to different pages and stuff like that and then come back and you have it, but as soon as you close the browser, it's gone. Which means you can kind of isolate what kind of data is stored and for how long. But local storage is the one we use the most. So the next activity we're going to do is activity number 2, where we have this login page. Where you can go ahead and log in, and it stores your information. All right? My name is Carson, here's my email, my age, and then some information about how I heard about them. But when I refresh, it goes away. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the, this is activity 2, the no persistence. You're going to build something like this, right, that can display that login information. So you have some code to start with. And yeah, basically all you have to do is take these text inputs and you have to build this most recent member thing, pretty sure. Kind of display what the login looks like without being able to store it. Okay, so this exercise, what we had was a screen with a few text box, few inputs, right? We had to grab the data from those inputs, and we had to console log that data, and then we had to go ahead and save it to that card section that had our information about our name, our email, our age, and where we heard about this cool website, right? So there isn't a whole lot of code to do this. It's pretty much just take the ID of the inputs, which if we go up here and we look, we have a form with the 4 inputs, right? And then with the submit button. So you go up and you'd find the name of the input. Does anyone remember what the difference between text area and input of type text is? No? Text area allows you to do multi-line text. A text input is 1 line. You can see there's even a rows HTML attribute to tell you how many lines it displays. Anyway, use jQuery to grab those inputs by their ID, right? You can use .val to extract the value out of the input. .val is different than .text. These inputs, .text doesn't work. .val works because there's a value associated with an input, not text. If you use .text, it would be in between the elements of the HTML tags, right? They open the closing tag, that's the text. But input boxes do not have that. Input boxes have a value attribute where things are associated, right? And then this .trim, does anyone know what .trim does? Rolando, what does it do? Removes a blank space at the beginning and the end of a string. Yeah, so if I typed in space, 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 Carson, space, space, space for my name in the name box, .trim would get rid of all those white space because it's useless, right? Now, if you have an input where it isn't useless, where white space is valuable, then you don't do dot trim. Now, it won't remove white space in between characters, okay? So if you have Carson space Howard, space, space, space at the end, it would get rid of the space at the end, but not the space between Carson and Howard. So that's the distinction. Once we have them in variables, we go ahead and we console log them out. Boop. So if we hit F12 or you open inspect and open the DevTools, you'll be able to see the data. And then right here, we're grabbing the different display divs by ID, and we're just injecting text from those variables, right? So if I go up here, it's not even, they're not divs, they're H2, H4, H4, and a P tag, right? So like I said, dot text affects what's here in between the opening and the closing tag, not what's in a value. And input boxes have a value, not that, value attribute, right? So that would set the default value. So remember the distinction between .val and .text. Anyway, any questions on this code right here? So this code is good to remember, and we'll slack out the solution. You're going to want it because I'm going to show you now how local storage works, give you an intro to that, and then we're going to go back and do this assignment with local storage. So when you refresh the page, it remembers who logged in or who the user is, right? So we're going to make it a bit more robust. Okay, so let me open up the local storage demo. Alright. You can see I already was playing with it earlier. Let me go ahead and clear this. Alright. So this is what you'd start with if you had not played with it. You have a guest book, right? And it says, what is your name? And I type Carson. Hit enter, hit save. It says Carson. If I refresh, it still says my name. That's pretty cool. Can I change my name? Carson 2. Yes, I can. But the neat thing about it is I can refresh as much as I want and still see it. I can even close that tab. I can even close the browser. Open it up again. And look. Still says Carson 2. This is local storage. It's pretty nice, huh? Already, you could probably imagine the possibilities, all the different activities you can do with local storage. So, why don't we look at the code? Alright, so we have our span and our input, right? So the span, your name, the input, which is my name, and then we have the button that allows us to save the name. All it is, right now, is a click handler, okay? So we go through and we do our event, prevent, default, and all that fun stuff. We clear the HTML in the greeting tag, which if you look up here, is just a span where our name will print, so Carson 2 in this instance. We grab the username for the your name input, so that's that text box where I entered my name. Then we get to local storage. So the first thing we're doing when we're adding a new name is clearing local storage. What this does is takes every value in your local storage for this particular web page in this browser and destroys it. So if I had anything else in local storage, it'd be gone too. Then we set my name into local storage. So literally, it's local storage with capital S dot set item. You get to pick an arbitrary key. So the key in this instance is name as a string, comma, the value you're storing with that key. To get the item back out, you simply do local storage dot get item with the key you attribute to that value. And we can go ahead and just store it as a text in that greeting span. Now right here, this is when we reload the page before that click handler executes, right? Before we click the button. If something exists in local storage, we can go ahead and get it by the same key, name, and store it in that span tag before anything happens. Now the first time after I cleared local storage manually in the DevTools, which you already saw I can do, and I'll show you a little bit more, you'll notice that it didn't put anything in the text, because when you go ahead and you try to get item on a key that does not exist in your local storage, it just returns nothing. So it's no big deal, right? If you're storing in text, if you're trying to use that value, it'd be a problem. You'd have to make sure it wasn't nothing. But you can see the API is pretty slim for local storage. There's only 2 other methods on the local storage API that you can even use. And one of them is to remove an explicit item. Right? Which we could just put instead of clear. And then the other one you'll never use, which just gets the name of a key at a particular index. But remove item, set item, get item, and clear. Pretty much the only 4 things you need to know about local storage, and that's it, and you have full control over local storage. So that's pretty cool. So anyway, the dev tools, how do I look at local storage? Because you can. If you go ahead and you open up your dev tools, there's an application tab. In the application tab, if you open it up, you'll see this storage, local storage. And it says file : / right now because I don't have a hosted web page, right? This is just on my file system shown in Chrome. And you can see the key is name and the value is Carson2. I can come in here, I can change it. Right? Whoops, I don't know what I just did. And I can add other stuff if I want. Now that's in local storage, and I can go ahead and get it out with my JavaScript. So if I go to my JavaScript, local storage, get item. It didn't like that. Put it in the wrong place. Oh yeah, I did it on the click. That's fine. I'll just click. So I can manually go in and I can add stuff to my local storage. If I clear that, you can see it comes in as null at the end, where other was null. That's the value you get out of local storage if a key doesn't exist. So we can just go ahead and get rid of this real quick. Go ahead. Okay, so what am I doing to clear stuff? Right here I have this button. This is clear all. So if you have a bunch of stuff in local storage, you can click clear all and it's gone. Or you can go ahead and add a key. You can click that particular key. Oh, it's not letting me delete it. And you should be able to delete the selection. There you go. Now you can delete the selected one, right? So if you want to look at your local storage, this is how you do it. Open the DevTools, go to Application, go to Storage, find Local Storage, and you can see everything that's stored. So let's look at another good example of local storage. Session storage, if I close the browser, will go away.
Okay.
Local storage doesn't, right? That's the only difference. Their API is exactly the same. If you wanted to use session storage instead of local storage, you would say session storage.setItem, session storage.getItem, session storage.clear. They're literally the same, other than one says local, one says session. And how they persist, right? One persists across browsers, browser refreshes, or browser closing and opening, one doesn't. So, we have GitHub. This is Firefox, but effectively the same. If I go to storage, and I look at local storage in GitHub, you can see I have a whole bunch of interesting stuff stored in here. They have a local storage called logged in. True. Now, that is not actually how they determine that I'm logged in. It's more secure than that, I certainly hope. Usually there's an access token or something that's stored in your cookies that allows you to actually verify you're logged in. But this is a rudimentary way that you can determine if someone is logged in. So you could go ahead on your little test apps that you make to kind of understand local storage and say logged in true, and determine when that's set to true, someone is logged in. Set it to false, they're no longer logged in, they gotta log in again, right? Or if it's nothing, they're not logged in. But anyway, you can see it even has JSON stored in it. This is a huge JSON blob. There is a max memory limit on local storage, but unless you're storing everything under the sun in there, you probably won't hit it. I think it's 128 kilobytes or something like that per local storage. It's pretty small, but when you think about how many kilobytes this takes up. If this is the value true, it takes up 1 byte. If it's the TRUE, the letters true as a string, it takes up 4 bytes. Unless it's UTF-8, then it will take up 8 bytes. So it doesn't take up that much space. A kilobyte's 1,000 bytes, right? So you can imagine this bad boy right here doesn't even take up 1,000 bytes. So you're not even at 1 kilobyte, and you have 128. You can store a lot in here. So, like I was saying on session storage, if I wanted to do this with session storage, I could literally just change it to session storage, and voila, you have session storage. But we'll talk about that one a little bit more later. So, any questions on local storage? I have a link I'm going to Slack out to you in the Saturday class. We'll go over it really quick too. This is the Mozilla Developer Network's API definitions for local storage. So, if I drag it over here, I'll kind of go through this with you because these are kind of hard sometimes to understand, especially when you're in a beginner still. It's a little bit more technical, right? So we open up the local storage page, and almost everything in your browser has an MDN page. So they're all similar to this. Arrays do, strings do, all of those things. You can look up their API. It tells you a little bit about it. Local storage is analogous to session storage with the same origin rules applied, but it's persistent across sessions. So, same origin rules applied, that means it applies to one website. When you see the term origin, origin is the website. It's the web address. www.google.com is an origin. It's a so local storage set on google.com can only be accessed by google.com, nothing else. Session storage is the same way. It's persistent across sessions, meaning I can close the browser, open it again, and I still can get to my local storage. Local storage was introduced in Firefox 3.5, so a long time ago. Anyway, it tells you a little bit about how to use it. You know, it gives you some definitions. It gives you some stuff you probably don't care much about. But there's lots of examples of how you can use it and some technical information, but the meat of it is right here. This section right here says methods. This is everything you can do with local storage. Right, so there's a clear method, get item, remove item, and set item. So if I click on it, I can look, and it tells you set item method of the storage interface, blah, 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 basically. Storage interface would be our local storage and our session storage. Set item, a key name, and a key value. So a key name is a DOM string, and a value is a DOM string. Basically means it's a string in JavaScript. That's all it is. Any string from JavaScript. The return value is undefined, so it doesn't return anything. When you call set item, you don't get anything back, so you don't got to worry about setting it to a variable. And then it tells you about some information that can cause problems, right? And then there's more examples of how you can use it. So here's how you can use local storage. We go ahead and go to remove item. It tells you it takes a DOM string, which is the key name, key you want to remove. This one says return void instead of undefined. Same thing, kind of. Get item, you want to see how get item works? You can see how get item works. It tells you returns the DOM string that was stored in there. Some more examples how it works. Anyway, MDN is very powerful. W3 Schools is kind of a corollary, but MDM is a bit more technical. Anyway, any questions on local storage before we move on? Fist of 5, how are we feeling on local storage? Because we're about to do an activity with it. Okay, most people are feeling pretty good. Alright, well, we'll put that to the test. Activity number 4. So what we're going to do, let me just go ahead and open it with Chrome. So, we have the same thing. Test at test.com. And if I refresh it, it's still there. So, same activity that we just did, but now we're persisting it to local storage. So the reason why I said keep track of that code that we just used is it's going to be similar, but now we're adding local storage into the mix. So, activity number 4, spend 10-15 minutes or so working on that, and we'll talk about it. Now remember, you need to also add some code to this solution so when the page reloads, it fills in that card details section with what's in local storage. So it's a little extra code you got to add to the old solution to make it work properly. But I think you guys are lucky because my cohort had project 3 right in that Christmas break. So it's 2 weeks they had off between the project. Project 3 starts now. No. Oh, wow. You know? So they're only going to have one more thing. Project 3? Yeah. Project 2 is or project 1 is 2 weeks from next week. We got 4 days. Like they would give us they'd be like, all right, it's Monday, you guys get to start your projects today. And then Thursday we had to get up and what they call it, they cut the deadline for the job because so we got 4 days to like full on like right after it. You know, like Friday, like 2 weeks, but back out. And I'm like, I don't think that 4 days is enough for us to do that. Was that in was that were you in a full-time one? Or were you in class all those days? Yeah. So, yeah, I guess they have time to think about everything else. Yeah, no, that'd be tough. That'd be really tough. Groups of fours are supposed to be, but even like people are naturally going in groups of five, I'm okay with it because either that or we pick one of the groups, or we pick one person from all the groups and just sacrifice them. But we're supposed to pre-assign group one, and then group two and three I think make it two. Yeah, project
So we pre-assign one group and then everybody else can choose.
no, we pre-assign all.
Oh, project one. Okay, project one we pre-assign. And then after that, they choose another. No. Well, we're not.
Alrighty, let's go over this one. Okay, so you'll notice this is the same code as the last solution, right? Starts out pretty easy because you can just copy the solution. Now what we need to do is we need to store into local storage these variables every time this is clicked, right? So we use the local storage set item interface or API, right? And we basically just give it some keys and then assign those values from those variables. Local storage clear, it's optional. It's nice when you do it because you can guarantee that you're working from a clean slate. But as long as your keys are the same, it's not a big deal. You're overwriting the values anyway. But using it's not a bad idea. I would get in the habit of when you're setting something in local storage, either do local storage clear if you're setting everything, or remove item and remove the original keys. But you don't need to, especially because this is a direct overwrite. Anyway, what else did we need to do? Well, when we refresh the page, we need to go ahead and load the stuff from local storage into that card. So we basically take that that text code right up here, right, where we put the variables into the p tags and the h tags and all that, and we just do local storage get item with the same keys that we set local storage with. Any questions on this?
Yeah. So now, if you run this page, when you clear your local storage, everything that it no longer displays the initial card that the HTML provides. It's just going to show everything null.
Yep.
How would you
prevent that?
fix that? Yeah. So the page loads
With the default data?
Right. If it's the user's first time coming.
Okay.
Right, where you want them to see an example.
Yeah, so if the basically the question was, we have this default information that's in the H2 tags, H4s, and Ps, and if we are to clear local storage, so why don't we look at this? If we clear local storage manually, when we refresh the page, you get a bunch of nulls. So how do you prevent that? That's a good question. So one thing you could do And you can do this for all of them. Var name equals that. And then you could do if name so now if I reload the page, oh, it flashed for a moment and then it freaked out. Name is coming in as something. So we can check if it's not equal to null. What the hell is going on? Yeah, it's coming in. Something weird is happening. Maybe it's coming in as a null string. It's coming in as a string null. Okay, well, we need to check that. So you could do if it doesn't equal null and it's well, basically just check that, right? So that's weird that it's coming in like that. I didn't think LocalStorage did that, but anyway, you can check what the return value is of that get item when it's not something you set, and basically you can guard against it with an if clause, and then not set it, right? Any other questions? Cool. I want you to take 5 minutes. We'll slack out the solution. Replace all of the local storage with session storage and see how it changes. Close the browser, close the tab, open it back up, refresh the page. See what's different between this local storage solution and the session storage solution. Kind of intuitively try to figure that out on your own, okay?
So this is what I did, the ternary operators, and this is what it looks like.
Yeah, it makes it empty instead of keeping the Jimmy John. But what I don't understand is why the fuck local storage is coming back with a string null.
Is it because I don't know actually.
See, this time it's coming in as in
An
the
actual null?
Is it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've
Yeah,
never seen it
that's
come back
weird.
as a string null. It's fucked up.
I wonder if it's
What?
I'm sorry I broke you.
I'm just so confused. My whole life is just
yeah, that's strange.
yeah. Because the ternary would work if you wanted to set it to blank, but if you wanted to keep it at Jimmy John, then you couldn't use the ternary. right?
Yeah, I mean, unless you put that as Jimmy John.
Yeah, you could do that.
Yeah, weird. I've
Yeah.
never seen that either.
Neither have I. I'm so confused. I was like, really? My whole life is a lie at this point. Something like that, man. All right. Who finished? Who can tell me what the difference is? How it acted differently? Anyone? How is this one different? Well, the easy difference is if I shut the browser and open it again, it no longer shows me, right? After I put my info in there, it'll show either the null stuff or it'll show nothing depending on what it does. So if I open this one, and the TAs can slack out the solution too in case you want to see it. See how it comes in as null, 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 right? That's the first one. So if I refresh, everything's good. But if I close this tab and open it again, everything's null. So the local storage, that's not the problem. That doesn't ever happen, right? You can close it and open it again to your heart's content and you're fine. But with the session storage, as soon as I close it, session's killed, it's done. So the TAs will slack that one out. One thing to note that I don't think I mentioned is local storage and session storage, and cookies for that matter, they're no place to store sensitive information. So if you have a password you're entering in, and the website stores that password that you keyed in local storage, don't use that website. Because anything on that webpage can get to your password, and while that password may only work for that website, who knows where else that password could be used, and that website could be maliciously stealing that information, right? They could send it off to wherever they want because now they have it stored in storage for you. And granted, other websites can't get to it, but they can do whatever they want with that data. So don't let them, don't let sensitive info, and you shouldn't put sensitive info inside local storage because people can find that. Granted, I mean, you know, if you send your password, they could probably take it anyway, right? But it's beyond the point. Don't put sensitive info there. It's too visible, too vulnerable. Alright, so we're going to talk a bit about cookies. Cookies aren't really going to be required for any of the homework, but it's good to know about them, so we're just going to talk about them a bit. They're pretty old school. and they're basically they're very similar to local storage and session storage in that they allow you to store some string data on your client. Now, a major difference between cookies and local storage and session storage is cookies can actually be transported to the server that they're talking to. So if your server sets a cookie, which a server cannot set local storage, right? That has to happen in the browser. But a server can set a cookie, because a cookie can come in through an HTTP header, right? So they can set the cookie, and then they can read it when you make a request. So if I have a cookie that has, say, an access token to allow me to log into a website, that cookie can be sent on every GET request to the server or the API, and that API can read that access token and know that you're logged in. If you're using local storage and you have an access token that says you're logged in, you would have to manually put that access token inside of the HTTP GET request to then send it to the server. Cookies happen automatically, right? So they allow communication between your server and your client, which is kind of nice, but it presents its own problems, because if you put too sensitive of data in there, well, then there's this area in the middle where anyone could potentially intercept that and learn about it. So cookies are not used as much these days to store that kind of stuff. Local storage is used a lot more. They're also a bit cumbersome to use. They have a really weird format. They're kind of a pain because Chrome does not let you do anything with cookies if you're hosting the web page from your file system. So these pages right here, I could not do anything with cookies in Chrome. Firefox lets you do it. Edge, I'm sure, lets you do it. Because they don't have as tight of restrictions on stuff. But Google Chrome is extraordinarily... they try very much to be super secure in that kind of an area, so nothing malicious could happen on your local machine, right? And there's no real reason to use a cookie on something that's hosted in your file system. It doesn't make any sense. They're not as easy to use as local storage, and they're certainly not as easy to understand cookies, but they're still used a lot. So an example of a website that can use cookies, they gave us this Heroku app that's hosted that we can see what a cookie does. So if I open up the storage again, we can go to application, we can look at cookies, which has this fun little cookie icon. You can see there's some random stuff already stored by jQuery from the jQuery CDN, which isn't too important. But if I go ahead and I put Carson in here, and I hit save, ooh, it didn't let it store the cookie. Oh, well, it did it. Firefox did it without refreshing, so good old Firefox. But anyway, it created a cookie with a key name and a value of Carson. But there's other stuff associated to the cookie. There's a domain, which is basically where you are on the web, right? So cookie-example-rcb.heroku app, that's what the domain is. There's a path. So for instance, there's no, this isn't like slash something, right? It's just the base root path of the URL, so there's a path associated with it. There's an expiration date, which is a really old value, which means it's never going to expire, basically. And there's a size, which is basically how large is this cookie and overall bytes, basically. There's some other stuff too that you don't necessarily need to worry about, but so you can set your expiration date is to like a really old value, and when you do that, it'll never hit the expiration date and never expire. It's an infinite cookie, basically. Cookies can expire. Local storage, session storage can expire when you close your browser. Local storage never expires. It never just goes away, but cookies have an expiration date on them where they will literally stop working. They'll be removed from your storage here, and that's that. So if I delete the cookie and I come back and refresh, my name's gone. But again, I can refresh, and using the cookie, it parses it out. So very similar to what we were just doing, just a slightly different interface. So why don't we look at that interface? Alright, so we have our HTML. It is a little bit more cumbersome. I mean, that's kind of an understatement. So let's look at the storage part of it. So like the local storage, we can go ahead and get our value out of our text box, our name. But then, to set it, you have this document.cookie. And you literally have to say it's equal to some crazy value, right? So what this does is it clears out anything that exists already in the cookies. It gives it a blank name. It gives it an expiration date that's far in the past, so it won't expire. Then right here, it creates a new cookie with the name of our username, and then gives it default values for the rest of the stuff. Okay, so this is like clear, basically, like local storage.clear. This is a new one, local storage.set item name equals username. You could also manually set an expiration date here. You can do a whole bunch of stuff with the cookies, but you have to build a string to do it properly, and that's what's irritating. And if you wanted to add another cookie, you couldn't just do document.cookie equals. You'd have to do document.cookie plus equals, and then build another cookie string and add it. So the maintenance of cookies is a nightmare, really. They're not fun. I try to avoid them at all costs when I'm doing my own programming. It's very rare that you actually need them these days, anyway. But anyway, you can console log out like the document cookie, so you can see what it looks like. So why don't we go ahead and see if in the console of this page we have that. Dang, we don't. Alright, well, we might not be able to see that because I can't run this code in Chrome. I can try it in Firefox, but I don't know exactly what's going to happen in newer versions. Anyway, if you wanted to parse the cookie for like the text, they built this read cookie function, and you can imagine this is a bit complex, right? You have to take the cookie, you have to split it by semicolon because that's the delimiter of the different cookie values. You have to go ahead and search through everything and try to find something that looks like the name of the cookie and an equal sign, right? So then you can split out of that and pull out the value. It's a lot of work to parse a cookie, whereas local storage is pretty easy. Yeah, Adam?
So online shopping website that cars still using cookies, or
Depends. It's all up to them. They can use cookies, they can use local storage.
so they have, okay.
Usually what happens with that kind of thing is you'd probably have some information in local storage related to the cart, maybe, but it would go to the server and get the information from the server. So a cart, part of it would be in local storage. Remember, you have limited memory in local storage and cookies, so you can't put the whole thing there, especially if you have a lot of items. But that is a good point. Yeah, you could put how many items you have in your cart, or you could put that you have a cart, and then the server could then use that information to load the cart information for you. So I don't expect you to totally understand cookies and everything. Just know that they're kind of analogous. It's loose to local storage, and they're a pain in the ass. So you're probably never going to want to use them yourselves. There are some other packages and APIs you can use to do this stuff for you that you can find online, or code that's already been written to help do it, because it sucks so much. But, you know, generally we try to avoid cookies. You know, they're less secure. They're easier for people to prevent. You can turn cookies off in your browser. You can't turn local storage off. So if you have a website that you're depending on cookies to exist, and they turn cookies off, well, too bad. That sucks. This doesn't work, right? So I'm going to Slack out the link to that Heroku app so you guys can play with it for a little bit and kind of see what cookies are like. Let's see if it loads. It's not loading for me right now. And then there should be some code. Activity number 7 should have some cookie code that you can look through, kind of play with. You can't do much with it in Chrome. If you use Firefox or Edge, you might be able to. But you can still inspect the code, kind of read through it for a little while. Don't spend too much time on it. We'll spend a little bit of time here, but then we're going to talk about what's happening next with class. But go through it, talk with people around you about how this all works, and kind of try to build an understanding of cookies. Maybe look up the MDN stuff on cookies. So, MDN cookies. There's this page right here. So if you want to read more about how cookies work, trying to get an understanding. Again, cookies aren't necessary for any of the homeworks we're going to be doing. So it's just kind of like a, hey, this is what cookies are. You kind of be familiar with them, those kinds of things, right? So spend 5-10 minutes or so, just kind of looking over cookies, talking with people around you, trying to get an understanding of how they work, but you don't got to be a pro. All right, Fist 5. How are people feeling about cookies? Obviously you don't got to be an expert. I mean, just a general understanding of what they are and what they're used for. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. They're still used a lot, but they're not used as much for stuff that you absolutely need. Okay, so they're used for like some tracking information, like, oh, hey, you came to our site, or hey, these are your preferences. They're used for stuff like that generally, that if you didn't get that information, it'd be okay because people can disable cookies. So most sites still use them to some extent, just they don't rely on them as much. Like GitHub has all the stuff in local storage about logins and stuff. You'd want to keep that in local storage because you can guarantee that they can't turn it off. So, that's a good question. So we're gonna come back at 12:30, I guess, and work on another big assignment. We'll go through and do that to-do app, but with local storage, make it persistent. And we'll talk about some stuff, talk about your next homework, and then we'll go. So, 12:30. You guys have a long lunch today. I'm gonna turn off the stream for now and stop recording. So, be back at 12:30.